Hello and welcome to this video where the subject here is introducing smart objects in Adobe Camera Raw. There is a need from time to time to be able to quickly and easily go back from Photoshop into Camera Raw and start reworking a previous RAW file. Now I work this way all of the time. In normal circumstances, when we're working in Adobe Camera Raw like this, we're working in a non-destructive way. We can go to any of the sliders on the right hand side. We can adjust them as many times as we wish. We can go back and forth between different sliders. We're not affecting the quality of the image because we're always opening the image up from the raw computer data. When we open the image up from Adobe Camera Raw into Photoshop, then we're no longer working on a raw image, unless of course we open it up as a smart object. If we were working solely within Photoshop with, let's say, JPEGs for example, we still have smart objects there and also smart filters too. But I'd like to come back and look at these in isolation a little later. Now I open this image on screen because it does give us something to look at while going through the introduction, but I also need a RAW file open to get access to my workflow options. Now we'll find them right down at the center bottom of the screen. Here we have what we call a hyperlink. You can see it's underlined, and when I click it, the workflow options open up. Now there's generally two changes that I make in the workflow options window. One of those is on the top right. I'm going to change this to work in 16-bit color. But the reason I brought you into the workflow options, of course, is down at the bottom left. Here's the little box which we can tick, and that tells Photoshop that in future it will open all raw documents as smart objects. So let's click OK, and in fact I think we'll open this parrot up into Photoshop as a smart object. Now with the image on screen, there's nothing that tells us instantly that we have a smart object open and what benefits we're going to get from that. Well, perhaps I can demonstrate one. Let's just assume we were working this image through, and despite having the image in Adobe Camera Raw to start, we've suddenly decided that perhaps it would be a good idea if we cropped a little bit from the top of this image. So I'm going to pick up my crop tool, make sure I've got no values at the top of the screen because I want a free crop. I'm going to drag the top down. I may even drag this in here a little bit, and maybe even this bit, a little bit at the bottom. So I'm making some changes on the fly as I see them and think they're appropriate. So I can hit the tick and commit that crop, and we could continue with our editing. Taking my cursor over to the top right, I'm going to use my expand panel option there to bring my layers out on screen, and you may notice there's a little icon on the bottom right corner, and that's telling us that we have a smart object. So let's just assume for the moment that despite doing what I've just done with the crop, that I wanted to do some work maybe even with the transform tool. Let me pick it up, edit, free transform. I'm going to hit Ctrl+0 to fit the image on screen with the bounding box. I'm going to hold the Shift key, so as I drag the top right toggle, I keep the image in register, because I could be working on a project here that requires what I've just done here, and I'm going to hit the tick to commit that. But it's not unusual at all to be working through a creative process and then realize that you want to go back to Camera Raw because you've spotted something that you want to deal with in Camera Raw. Well, if we move the cursor over to the right hand side back to our thumbnail, if I just select the thumbnail and double click, our image goes straight back to Camera Raw in its entirety. So for the sake of this demonstration, let's just assume that I had the desire to take this colourful bird and remove all the colour. And what I wanted to do was give it a bit of contrast and a bit of clarity. And then we can open it up. You'll notice that the buttons at the bottom right of Adobe Camera Raw have changed a little. It's just given us an OK and a cancel, because when I click the OK, what we're actually doing is just updating the smart object we've already got open on screen. But as you can see, it does not impact the image size or the crop that I originally made. There are quite a few options that we can use with the image as a smart object. For example, if I hit Ctrl T to bring up the free transform tool, I could decide to put my cursor just outside the bounding box and rotate the image, drag it down and maybe reduce the size, making it quite small of course, and hit the Enter key. There are some things we can't do while we retain the smart object status of this particular image. Because if I take you to the filters as an example, we can apply the blur filter, as we can see, but not the artistic. They're greyed out. Brush strokes are greyed out. The sketch and the texture, they're all greyed out too. Now I've just demonstrated that we can make a number of changes with this image, but if I suddenly had second thoughts and decided that in fact I was right the first time with the color image, I can go back to my smart object, I can double click, it'll open up into Camera Raw, I can reset the saturation, and I can have it back open in seconds. Now I want to do a very quick demonstration with a JPEG image, so I'm going to locate a JPEG from a 20 megapixel Canon camera. I'm going to open it up on screen. There you can see the image. What I'd like to do is to reduce this image over its own canvas. Now to do that, I'm just going to touch the lock to just remove that lock. And I'm going to use the free transform tool. Remember, it's in the edit menu, but Control T. Going to hold the Shift key to make sure that when I drag in the top right toggle, the height and width remain in register. But I'm going to make this image very small, just for demonstration purposes. When I hit the tick on the options bar here, what I've effectively done is to throw away lots of pixels. No problem with that in normal circumstances, because we would be telling Photoshop that we want to use this picture this small on this canvas. But if I change my mind and want to return this back to full size, well, let's see how successful that is. I'll hit Ctrl T to put that bounding box back, and I'll drag each of these to each side of the image so we make sure we get it back exactly where we started. Well, I don't think you need me to point out where the problem is. That reduction in size discarded lots of pixels, so we can't then get creative, change our mind and come back to the full size image. We can when we work with a smart object. So closing down that JPEG and coming back to my Parrot smart object, if I were to hit Ctrl T again, you'll notice there is a little difference. We do get that crisscross effect, which is also telling us that we're working on a smart object. So what I could do here is to actually reset this back onto the canvas I have here. So let's go here and set the level to 0. So now I can drag this up to the top, that to the bottom, to the right and to the left, and when we commit that change, the quality remains there. Now if you were creating a montage and you had 5 or 6 images to place within the montage, as the montage is gradually being developed, you're never sure what size each part of the image needs to be or where it needs to be within the canvas. So working with smart objects would give you ultimate freedom. What I'd like to do next is to copy this layer. Now I think we've done this once or twice in other videos, and one of the easiest ways to do that is either to drag this down over the copy icon at the bottom of the screen, but probably the easiest way is Ctrl J. Well, you'll notice that I've got now two layers, but both of them are smart objects. So let me open up the first one back into Camera Raw, take advantage of the smart object status, double click, and we're instantly open. Now let's just say that I've changed my mind yet again, and I've decided that I was right the first time and I want this bird in black and white. When I click OK, the changes impact both of those layers. Now I can't see any immediate advantage to do that. So what I'm going to do is to hit Ctrl Z, which is the shortcut keys to undo the last operation, and I'll drop that back into the bin, so we're back to where we started. Now we've just got our one smart object. What I'd like to do is to go just to the right of the thumbnail, right click, and I'm going to make a new smart object via a copy. It looks exactly the same as what we did with Ctrl J, but with an important difference. This image, which is the one we copied from, had a link back to Camera Raw via the smart object status we applied. And so did this one, but copying it in the way I've just done severs the link between the two. I can demonstrate by opening up the top layer, by changing my mind yet again, opening up the image, and as you can see it only impacts one layer. Now that has a fair degree of creative potential, of course. So if you want to have multiple layers of the same image and you want to be able to edit them in RAW independently of each other, just go to the right of the thumbnail, right click, and choose New Smart Object via Copy. What I'd like to do to bring this video to a close though is just drop that other one in the bin for a moment. Now I'd like to make another change to my smart object, but within Photoshop. I'm going to go to my Filters menu. I'm going to choose, let's choose Blur, and we'll choose Gaussian Blur. There's no creative reason I'm doing this, it's just for demo purposes, so please bear with me. I'm blurring the image. Watch what happens to the thumbnail on the right hand side when I click OK. Rather a lot seems to happen. So the smart object status is having quite an impact here. Now I don't want to dwell too much on what we've got here because I think it may be beneficial if we have a separate video where we look at creative filters and we bring into play smart objects too. And maybe when we get to make a montage we'll do the same thing. But just to give you a flavour of what the smart object is doing here, and remember we still have the ability with the original image to double click and open it straight back up into Camera Raw, make any changes, click OK, and we can be back in play with the blur that we've just applied. I can hit the little eye here and I can take the blur off. I can select the mask. Now you'll remember the mask. Let's turn the mask back on first, and when I select it we get the opportunity via black and a brush or any other tool to start to just reveal the original image sitting beneath, if that's what we want, and I'm sure you can see creative possibilities there. But the other great thing about this smart object, in fact we've turned it almost into a smart filter, is the Gaussian blur. If I applied a Gaussian blur to a normal image in Photoshop, then decided I'd done it too much and I wanted to back off, I can't just go back into the blur and drop the sliders down. I've got to go back to the original image and just blur it again, but blur it less. Not here. I can double click the words Gaussian blur here, and as you can see the option appears and I can back off. Let's leave some of it in place so we can see it actually working. Let's go back to about 19 or 20 and click OK. Lots and lots of versatility here. Now I've decided to close down my Parrot, and as you can see I've opened up Photoshop's bridge here. Quite often when I'm working on images, things don't always go according to plan, or there's a shortage of time and you get part way through the manipulation and have to leave what you're doing. What I've got here is a couple of examples that have been sitting in a folder of mine for quite some months now, particularly this one on the left. You can see down here that it's a Photoshop document, and what I'd like to do is to open that up. Now I started work on this months ago, and for reasons now I can't recall, I dropped it into what I call my current folder with the intention of coming back at some stage and picking up where I left off. But if you look over on the right hand side into the layers, you can see I've actually got two independent versions of this particular image. So I've copied the image using that little tip I mentioned earlier, right click and new smart object via copy. And what I've got here is a slightly darker foreground and a slightly lighter foreground with the one above, and a layer mask to allow the lighter foreground of this image to show through. But both of these are smart objects. So if we take the cloudscape for example, if I would like to add a bit more power to that, I could just double click this. Remember, it was months when I did this, but it's still a raw file. So if I wanted to add a bit of blue into the sky, you know the drill here. If I wanted to make any changes that I saw fit, let's put a little bit of a graduation on the top. The smart objects allow me the flexibility to do exactly that. Then if I felt that I'd lightened the foreground a little too much and I needed to darken it, particularly in the foreground, I've got that opportunity too. Select the layer, double click, open it up, and because I'm only using the bottom part of this, I don't have to worry about putting a graduated filter. I could just drop it down a little bit and just click OK. You can see the flexibility that smart objects allow us. Now I have an interesting little anecdote here, nothing to do with smart objects of course. Let me turn off this layer and hold the shift key and just turn off the mask for a moment. You can see out in the distance here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 people. Well, in fact they were all photographers, and they weren't part of one photographic club who had arrived by coach or anything like that. These were all individuals, and counting those that were on the same jetty that I was on, there was just under 30 people who decided on that Sunday morning that a dawn shoot was a good idea. This is Narrabeen. It's about 30 kilometres north of Sydney. But back to our smart objects. I'll click the mask to bring it back into play and turn the bottom layer on. You can see how if I was using two images here to put together a seascape or a landscape, where I wanted to use the sky from one shot and maybe the foreground from the other, not only can I quite easily do that using layer masks, but if we use the raw smart object status, then when we've got the top of one image and the bottom of another, sometimes if they're not quite balanced, well, we've got the opportunity to quickly open them up into Camera Raw, make those changes, knowing all of the time we're not affecting the quality of our image at all. So if you set up Smart Object Status in Camera Raw and you get part the way through a piece of work, or you just want to save it for future reference, save it as a Photoshop file. Not only will all of your layers be saved and any masks you may have created, but also the Smart Object Status. And we'll come back and look at smart objects directly in Photoshop and smart filters a little bit later. Now, I use smart objects all the time in Adobe Camera Raw and Photoshop because I know whether I'm working on just a single layer image or a multi-layer image that I'm going to change my mind. I'm going to want to duck and dive a little bit. I'm going to get ideas as the creative juices flow, and smart objects give me the opportunity to make all those changes without any problems at all.